Hello there. Welcome to Lena's Lane. In this episode of Case Files, I'll be sharing with you the case of the Scottsboro Boys. So make sure you stay tuned for more. Clarence Norris, born in 1912 to sharecroppers in Warm Springs, Georgia, was 19 years old. He was the second of 11 children. His father had been a slave and told harrowing stories of his life during slavery. At his father's insistence, Clarence dropped out of school after the first grade to help the family sow crops. Tired of his father's beatings, he left home at 15 to find work. He fell in love, moved to Gadsden, Alabama, and worked in the Goodyear plant. After his girlfriend left him, he made his way to the railroad tracks. He was headed to Sheffield, Alabama to visit an aunt and find work. Charles Charlie Williams was 19 years old. When he was 4, his mother died, and 6 of his 7 siblings did not survive to adulthood. Charlie dropped out of school in the 5th grade to help support his family. He worked in a pharmacy after his father became sick. He was sent to live with an aunt in Riverdale, Georgia, but there he again dropped out of school to work. He was on his way to visit family in Tennessee when he hopped the train. Born and raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Andrew Andy Wright did well in school but dropped out in the 6th grade after his father died to help support his mother Ada and his younger siblings. He drove a truck for a produce distributor for 7 years until they learned how young he was and let him go. He heard about a government job hauling logs on a boat, and with his younger brother Roy, they set off for Memphis, Tennessee. Andy did not tell their mother where they were going when they left home that day. Leroy Roy Wright, Andy's younger brother, was the youngest of the Scottsboro Boys, only 12 years old. With 4 years of school before he dropped out to work at a grocery store, when he hopped the train with his brother, it was his first time away from home. 18-year-old Haywood Patterson was born in Elberton, Georgia, the 4th of 9 living children to sharecroppers Claude and Janie. He was devoted to his parents and was especially close to his mother. He left school in the 3rd grade to work as a delivery boy. With his parents having so many mouths to feed, Haywood ate meals away from home as much as possible and eventually left home at 14. He hopped freight trains from Ohio to Florida looking for work and was on his way to Chattanooga to work as a steel worker. Olin Montgomery, born in Monroe, Georgia in 1913, was 17 years old. After his parents divorced, he was raised by his mother, Viola, who supported the family on only $1.50 a week. He dropped out of school in the 5th grade to help his mother work. He was very nearsighted and blind in one eye from a cataract. Olin left home to travel to Memphis in search of a job that would allow him to buy a new pair of glasses. 15-year-old Ozzie Powell was born in rural Georgia. He was quiet and shy, had only 1 year of school, and could only write his name. Raised by his mother and stepfather, he began working hard labor jobs at 13. He ran away when he was 14. He liked to travel and worked odd jobs while on the road. He was traveling the trains that day looking for work. Willie Robertson was born in Columbus, Georgia, and was 15 years old. His mother died when he was 2, therefore raised by his grandmother. He left school at the age of 12 and worked at a hotel until he hopped the train to Memphis to seek work. Lastly, there was 13-year-old Eugene Williams, one of the youngest of the Scottsboro Boys. His mother was Mammy Wilson Wilcox, and he was working as a dishwasher at a Chattanooga, Tennessee cafe before he hopped the train. On March 25, 1931, in the depths of the Depression, a number of people were hoboing on a Southern Railroad freight train traveling between Chattanooga and Memphis, Tennessee. As for hoboing, a hobo is a migrant worker that travels looking for work. The hobos consisted of a mix of black and white teens. A group of white teenage boys saw Haywood Patterson on the train and attempted to push him off, claiming it was a white man's train. A group of whites then gathered rocks and attempted to force all the black teens from the train. Haywood and the other black teens were able to fight off the group. The humiliated white teens jumped or were forced off the train and reported it to a nearby train master that they had been attacked by a group of black teen boys. Shortly after, the police stopped and searched the train at Paint Rock, Alabama, and arrested the black teen boys. Amongst the arrested were two young white women from Huntsville, Alabama, 21-year-old Victoria Price and 17-year-old Ruby Bates. They were taken to jail facing charges of vagrancy and illegal sexual activity. In order to avoid these charges, they falsely accused the Scottsboro Boys of sexually assaulting them. The accused were taken to Scottsboro, Alabama, to the Scottsboro jail. Victoria and Ruby were taken to the hospital and examined by doctors R.R. Bridges and Marvin Lynch. News of the incident circulated quickly. White outrage erupts over the allegations, and a lynch mob gathers at the Scottsboro jail, prompting the sheriff to call Alabama Governor Benjamin Meeks Miller. Governor Miller in turn calls the National Guard to protect the jail and its prisoners. The original cases were tried in Scottsboro, Alabama. Only 4 of the teens knew each other prior to the incident on the train, but as the trials drew regional and national attention, they became known as the Scottsboro Boys. March 30th, a grand jury indicts all 9 of the Scottsboro Boys. The Scottsboro Boys was taken to jail in Scottsboro but had to be removed under the protection of 100 National Guardsmen when a mob threatened to lynch them. They were held about 60 miles away and delivered to Scottsboro the next morning of April 6 for their trials. On April 6th and 7th, Clarence and Charlie are tried before Judge A.E. Hawkins. During prosecution testimony, Victoria stated that she and Ruby witnessed the fight on the train, that one of the black teens had a firearm, and that they all assaulted her at knife point. During cross-examination by Stephen Roddy, a real estate lawyer who was there to aid attorney Milo Moody, Victoria livened her testimony with jokes that brought laughter to the courtroom. Briggs testified that his examination of Victoria found no vaginal tearing, which would have been indicative of sexual assault, and that she had semen in her for several hours. When Ruby testified, she failed to mention that either she or Victoria were sexually assaulted until she was cross-examined. The prosecution ended with testimony from 3 men who claimed the black teens fought the white teens, put them off the train, and took charge of the white girls. The prosecution rested without calling any of the white teens as witnesses. During the defense testimony, defendant Charlie testified that he was not part of the fight, that Patterson had the firearm, and that he had not seen the white girls on the train until the train pulled into Paint Rock. Defendant Clarence stunned the courtroom by implicating the other defendants. He denied participating in the fight or being in the train car when the fight took place, but continued by saying he did see the alleged assault by the other teens from his spot atop the next boxcar. During closing, the prosecution said, "If you don't give these men death sentences, the electric chair might as well be abolished." The defense made no closing argument, nor did it address the sentencing of the death penalty for their clients. The court started the next case while the jury was still deliberating on the first. The first jury deliberated less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Clarence and Charlie were convicted and sentenced to death. April 7th and 8th, the trial for Haywood occurred while Clarence and Charlie's case were still under consideration by the jury. While the jury returned its verdict from the first trial, the jury from the second trial was taken out of the courtroom. When the verdicts of guilty were announced, the courtroom erupted in cheers, as so did the crowd outside. After the outburst, the defense of Haywood moved for a mistrial, but Judge Hawkins denied the motion and testimony continued. During the second trial's prosecution testimony, Victoria mostly stuck with her story, stating that Haywood assaulted her. She accused Haywood of shooting one of the white teens, while also volunteering, "I have not had intercourse with any other white man but my husband. I want you to know that." Haywood defended his actions by testifying again that he had seen Victoria and Ruby in the train car, but had nothing to do with them. On cross-examination, he testified that he had seen all but 3 of those Negroes ravish that girl, but then changed his story. He said that he had not seen any white women until the train got to Paint Rock. Roy testified that Haywood was not involved with the girls, but that 9 black teenagers had intercourse with the girls. On cross-examination, Roy testified that Haywood was not involved with the girls, but that the long, tall black fellow had the firearm. He is not here. He also claimed to have been on top of the boxcar and that Clarence was the one who had a knife. Co-defendants Andy, Eugene, and Ozzie all testified that they did not see any women on the train. Olin testified that he sat alone on the train and did not know any of the referenced events. Haywood was convicted and sentenced to death by electric chair. April 8th and 9th, Olin, Ozzie, Willie, Eugene, and Andy are tried. This trial began within minutes of Haywood's case. Victoria repeated her testimony, adding that the teens split into 2 groups of 6 to assault her and Ruby. Victoria accused Eugene of holding the knife to her throat and said that all of the other teens had knives as well. Ruby took the stand, identifying all 5 defendants as among the 12 entering the train car, forcing off the whites, and ravishing her and Victoria. Dr. Bridges was the next prosecution witness. On cross-examination, Bridges testified intercourse had taken place sometime before the incident. He also testified that defendant Willie was diseased with syphilis and gonorrhea, a bad case of it. He admitted under questioning that Victoria told him that she had had intercourse with her husband and that Ruby had intercourse earlier as well, before the alleged assault incident. Olin, Ozzie, Willie, Eugene, and Andy were convicted and sentenced to death, even though there was no medical evidence indicating that sexual assault had taken place. And on the evening of April 8th, the case against 13-year-old Roy began. The prosecution presented only testimony from Victoria and Ruby. His case went to the jury at 9 that evening. Roy's case ends in a hung jury when 11 jurors seek a death sentence and 1 voted for life imprisonment. Judge Hawkins set the executions for July 10, 1931, the earliest date Alabama law allowed. The teen cells were next to the execution chamber, and they heard the July 10, 1931 execution of William Stokes, a black man from St. Clair County convicted of murder. They later recalled that he died hard. Now, after this initial verdict, protest emerged in the North. With help from the Communist Party USA, better known as CPUSA, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, the case was appealed, leading to the U.S. Supreme Court overturning the convictions in 1932 in Powell versus State of Alabama. The retrial was moved to Decatur, Alabama before Judge James Horton. During the retrials, one of the alleged victims admitted to fabricating the assault story and asserted that none of the Scottsboro Boys touched either of the white women. In a letter from Ruby to a boyfriend surfaces. In it, she denies having been assaulted. The jury still found the defendants guilty, but the judge set aside the verdict and granted a new trial. For the third time, a jury, now with one African American member, returned a guilty verdict. The case was sent to the Supreme Court on appeal. It ruled that African Americans had to be included on juries in ordered retrials. When Victoria took the stand, New York criminal defense attorney Samuel Leibowitz confronted her with a contradiction in her testimony. She exclaimed, sticking a finger in the direction of defendant Haywood, and I quote, "One thing I will never forget is that one sitting right there assaulted me." The attorney tried to question her about a conviction for fornication and adultery in Huntsville, but the court sustained a prosecution objection. 5 of the original 9 Scottsboro defendants testified that they had not seen Victoria or Ruby until after the train stopped in Paint Rock. Willie testified that he was suffering from syphilis with sores that prevented him from walking and that he was in a car at the back of the train. Olin testified that he had been alone on a train cart the entire trip and had not known about the fight or alleged assaults. In turn, Ozzie said while he was not a participant, he had seen the fight with the white teenagers from his vantage point between the boxcars where he had been hanging on. He said he saw the white teenagers jump off the train. Willie, Olin, and Ozzie all denied that they had known each other or the other defendants before that day. Andy, Eugene, and Haywood testified that they had previously known each other, but had not seen the women until the train stopped in Paint Rock. Attorney General Thomas Knight questioned them extensively about instances in which their testimony supposedly differed from the other testimony at their trial in Scottsboro. They did not contradict themselves in any meaningful way. Haywood testified on his own behalf that he had not seen the women before stopping in Paint Rock. He withstood a cross-examination from Knight, who shouted and shook his finger at and ran back and forth in front of the defendant. At one point, Knight demanded, "You were tried at Scottsboro." Haywood snapped, "I was framed at Scottsboro." Knight thundered, "Who told you to say that?" Haywood replied, "I told myself to say it." Leibowitz called one final witness, Ruby. Ruby had been absent from trial thus far. She had disappeared from home in Huntsville weeks before the new trial began, and every sheriff in Alabama had been ordered to search for her, to no avail. Now 2 guardsmen open the courtroom doors and enters Ruby, in stylish clothes, eyes downcast. Ruby proceeded to testify and explained that no assault had taken place. She stated none of the defendants had touched her or even spoken to her. When asked if she had been assaulted on March 25, 1931, Ruby said, "No, sir." When asked why she initially said she had been assaulted, Ruby replied, "I told it just like Victoria did because she said we might have to stay in jail if we did not frame up a story after crossing a state line with men." Ruby proceeded by saying Victoria had said she didn't care if all the Negroes in Alabama were put in jail. This recantation seemed to be a severe blow to the prosecution. Ruby admitted having intercourse with Lester Carter in the Huntsville railway yards 2 days prior to making accusations. Finally, she testified she had been in New York City and had decided to return to Alabama to tell the truth, at the urging of Reverend Harry Fosdick of that city. Knight cross-examined her. He noted her stylish dress and demanded where she had gotten her fine clothing. When she responded that the Communist Party had paid for her clothes, any credibility she had with the jury was destroyed. Judge Horton warned spectators to stop laughing at her testimony or he would eject them from his courtroom. And once again, the jury submitted a guilty verdict and sentenced the teens to death. Haywood and Norris was granted a retrial in Decatur. The retrial was set for January 20th, 1936, and on January 23rd, Haywood was convicted of sexual assault and sentenced to 75 years, which was the first time in Alabama that a black man had not been sentenced to death in the sexual assault of a white woman. On January 24, 1936, while being transported back to Birmingham jail, Ozzie pulls a knife and slashes a deputy's throat. Sheriff J. Sandlin stops the car and shoots Ozzie in the head. He survived, but suffered permanent brain damage and was never the same. On July 15, 1937, Clarence Norris was convicted of sexual assault and sentenced to death. July 22, 1937, Andy Wright was convicted of sexual assault and sentenced to 99 years. On July 24, 1937, Charlie Williams was convicted of sexual assault and sentenced to 105 years in prison. On July 24, 1937, Ozzie Powell was taken into court and the new prosecutor, Thomas Lawson, announced that the state was dropping sexual assault charges against Ozzie and that he was pleading guilty to assaulting a deputy. He was sentenced to 20 years. The state dropped the sexual assault charges as part of this plea bargain. On July 24, 1937, the state of Alabama dropped all charges against Willie Robertson, Olin Montgomery, Eugene Williams, and Roy Wright. The four had spent over 7 years in prison on death row as adults, despite their ages. Thomas Lawson announced that all charges were being dropped against the remaining 4 defendants. He said that after careful consideration, every prosecutor was convinced that Willie and Olin were not guilty. Roy and Eugene, regardless of their guilt or innocence, were 12 and 13 at the time. And in view of the jail time they had already served, justice required that they also be released. On July 26, 1937, Haywood was sent to Atmore State Prison Farm. The remaining Scottsboro Boys was in custody. Clarence, Andy, and Charlie were at this time in Kilby Prison. And on October 26, the U.S. Supreme Court declines to hear the appeal of Haywood-Patterson. Governor Graves had planned to pardon the prisoners in November 15, 1938, but was upset by their hostility and refusal to admit their guilt. He refused the pardons but did commute Clarence's death sentence to life in prison. When Haywood-Patterson was jailed, he regretted not paying more attention in school. Using a Bible and a dictionary, he taught himself to read and write in 8 months. Following his conviction, Haywood spent 13 years in prison. He escaped in 1949 and in 1950 was found in Michigan, but the governor refused to extradite him. He wrote a book about his experience called The Scottsboro Boy. In 1951, he was convicted of manslaughter over stabbing someone in a bar fight and sentenced to 6 to 15 years in prison, where he died of cancer in 1952. Ozzie Powell was paroled in 1946 following his conviction for assault. He was reported to have died in Atlanta in 1974. During the time Charlie Williams was jailed, he contracted tuberculosis in prison and was stabbed by a prison guard who mistook him for Andy Wright. He was paroled November 17, 1943, after having been held in prison for a total of 12 years in some of Alabama's worst institutions. While Charlie did end up getting married and working as a laundry worker in Atlanta, his eyes never recovered from being tear gassed while in prison. prison. He was reported to have died not long after his release due to tuberculosis. Andy Wright was convicted and sentenced to 99 years. He was paroled and returned to prison after violating parole. He was then paroled in New York State in 1950. By the mid-1950s, he seemed to have settled for good in Connecticut. He remained in contact with Clarence Norris for a few years and planned on Clarence reuniting with younger brother Roy. But after Roy's death, Clarence never saw Andy again. Andy moved home to Tennessee to be with his mother, Ada Wright, and died there in 1968. He is buried in an unmarked grave beside his brother Roy. In prison, after witnessing men die on death row, Clarence Norris suffered nightmares of dying in the electric chair. Clarence Norris was the only defendant finally sentenced to death. Governor Graves of Alabama in 1938 commuted his death sentence to life. Given parole in 1946, he jumped and went into hiding. In 1976, he was found in Brooklyn, New York, having married and had children. In 1970, he had begun seeking a pardon. With the help of the NAACP and Alabama's attorney and Governor George Wallace, pardoned him in 1976, declaring him not guilty. Norris published an autobiography, The Last of the Scottsboro Boys, in 1979. He died of Alzheimer's disease on January 23, 1989. Willie Robertson suffered from asthma. After being jailed, his asthma was aggravated due to the lack of fresh air in prison. He fell in love easily and would write letters to female pen pals describing his love of dancing, shows, parties, swimming, piano, guitar, and tennis. In 1937, the state dropped all charges for Willie Robertson, Olin Montgomery, Eugene Williams, and Roy Wright, who had already been in prison for 6 years. Willie settled in Brooklyn and found steady work. He remained in contact with Olin throughout the years. While planning a visit with former cellmate Clarence, it was discovered by the two men that Willie died of an asthma attack in 1959, the week prior to their reunion. During the initial arrest, Olin Montgomery's glasses had got broken when he was arrested. He was not given a new pair in jail for 2 years, during which time he could not even see a match in his own hand. He composed songs in prison, including the Lonesome Jailhouse Blues, and longed for a guitar. Olin attempted a vaudeville career after being released from prison, but these plans never materialized. He drifted around in the North, working odd jobs and struggling with a drinking problem. He remained in contact with Clarence Norris, Willie Robertson, and the Wright brothers. After Willie and Roy died in 1959, he told Norris he planned on returning to the South. He did so within the next year and reportedly died in Alabama in 1975. Eugene Williams moved with family to St. Louis. His family planned on him going to seminary school, but whether this happened is uncertain. Where and when Eugene settled and died is unknown. In prison, Roy Wright liked to read and kept his Bible with him at all times. However, he thought magazines would be the ruination of his mind. After Alabama freed Roy, the Scottsboro Defense Committee took him on a national lecture tour. He later had a career in the U.S. Army and Merchant Marine. And then August 16, 1959, believing his wife had been unfaithful during his tour, he shot and unalived her, and then shot himself. Ruby Bates toured for a short while as an ILD speaker, the International Labor Defense. She said, and I quote, "Sorry for all the trouble that I caused them," and claimed that she did it because she was frightened by the ruling class of Scottsboro. Later, she worked in a New York State spinning factory until 1938. That year, she returned to Huntsville. Ruby died 1976 in Washington State, where she lived with her carpenter husband. Victoria Price worked in the Huntsville cotton mill until 1938, then moved to Flintville, Tennessee. She never recanted her testimony and died in 1982 in Lincoln County, Tennessee. In 2010, a museum was opened to commemorate the injustices that these 9 teens faced. This museum is called the Scottsboro Boys Museum and is located in Joyce Chapel, which is considered a historical site in Scottsboro, Alabama. And in 2013, the state of Alabama issued posthumous pardons for Haywood Patterson, Charlie Williams, and Andy Wright. And that was the case of the Scottsboro Boys. Down in the comments section, let us know whether or not you heard of this case. What were your thoughts? Let's talk about it. And thanks for watching. Bye for now.